Hi, my name's Nobody. At least, that's how my mother made me feel when she said it out loud. I need a real child. She didn't whisper it. She didn't cry. She said it like a grocery list. And then she left. Not just the house, but the family. For her ex-husband. For his daughter. For $3 million she thought could buy her peace. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just walked away, holding everything they shattered. But 1 week later, she came back, not out of love, but panic. And that's where everything changed. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening? And where are you right now? Because this story, it's about what happens when the people who raise you are the same ones who ruin you. And the ending? Well, let's just say not everyone gets a seat at the table. I started setting the table around 4. The afternoon light was slipping through the kitchen blinds, streaking gold onto the floor like it always did this time of year. I moved slower than usual. There wasn't any rush. No one was early, and I knew exactly who was coming and who wasn't. Still, I set out the good plates, the porcelain ones with the faint green vine along the rim. I unfolded the linen napkins I'd ironed the night before, folded them into thirds, and tucked the forks in, just like Mom used to. Muscle memory, I guess. A kind of obedience that stays in your bones, even when you wish it didn't. When I opened the cabinet above the fridge and reached for the Thanksgiving plate, her plate, I hesitated. For half a second, I almost shut the door, but my hand went on autopilot. I brought it down, set it gently at the end of the table, top edge facing the window, just the way she liked. Out of habit, I placed the wine glass beside it, even though I knew she wouldn't be clinking it tonight. The smell of roasted turkey was everywhere by then. The oven hummed low and steady, and outside the wind blew dry leaves across the driveway. You could hear them scraping the pavement if you stood still long enough. By 5, the others were arriving. My brother James and his wife were the first. He brought wine like he always did, something French, overpriced, and probably undrinkable. Then came Aunt Margot and her new boyfriend, who no one really liked but tolerated for the holiday. I gave hugs, refilled drinks, kept my smile on straight, just like I was raised to. When we finally sat down, every seat was filled except one. Her chair. It was there, at the head of the table, right beneath the light fixture she always complained was too harsh. I noticed how no one even glanced at it. No one asked where she was or why she wasn't here. They all knew. No one had the guts to say it out loud, and maybe they were right. Maybe silence was easier. But I left her plate there, full setting, untouched. We passed the stuffing, made small talk about work, about how the Bears were still a disaster this season. It was fine, quiet, polite. My father chewed his food slowly. Every so often I saw him glance down, not at his plate, but somewhere between his hands, like he was trying to make himself smaller. Then, in a lull between dishes, he said it. She said, "She needs a real child." Just like that. No build-up, no warning. Just a sentence dropped in the middle of dinner like a knife. The room went still. Margot froze mid-bite. Even James, who never shut up, had no comeback. My father didn't look at anyone. He just kept his eyes on the half-carved turkey, as if it might offer him an answer. "She's having dinner with her ex-husband," he added. "And their daughter. She called this morning." That was it. No explanation, no apology, just facts. I didn't say a word. I didn't move. Inside, I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. But from the outside, you wouldn't have known. I kept my face calm. I reached for my water, took a slow sip. My hand didn't shake, but my throat burned all the way down. So that's what I am, not real. The conversation limped back into motion. James cracked a joke that didn't land. Aunt Margot muttered something about how people change. Someone laughed too loudly. No one looked at me. That suited me just fine. I started noticing things, small, dumb things. The way the green beans were slightly overcooked. The buzz of the fridge when the door didn't close right. The fork in my hand had a little scratch across the handle. I focused on those. Anything but what had just been said. My father didn't look at me once. He didn't say I was his real daughter. Didn't push back. Didn't tell them how he raised me, how I stayed when she left the first time. Didn't say a damn thing. And in that silence, I understood something bigger than hurt. I was on my own. When dessert came out, I stood up. "I'm good," I said quietly. "Thanks." No one stopped me. I gathered my plate, carried it to the sink. I rinsed it, stacked it on top of the others. Took my glass, emptied it. All smooth, no scene. Then I walked out of the kitchen. I paused in the hallway. From where I stood, I could see the dining room, my father leaning back in his chair, the others filling their plates again like nothing had cracked in half. And there it was, at the end of the table, her seat, her plate, still untouched. That was the moment I realized she hadn't just left the house, she had already left us. The dishes were still warm when I started rinsing them, the gravy pans sticky and stubborn under hot water. The others had long since drifted into the living room. Laughter came in waves, the kind that sounded forced if you really listened, like everyone was trying to pretend the day had gone as planned. I scraped the last bits of stuffing into the garbage, then stacked the pans neatly by the sink. No one offered to help, not that I expected them to. My father sat in his recliner, television glowing but silent, as if sound would demand too much of him. He held the remote in his lap, unmoving, eyes fixed somewhere just past the screen. From the kitchen, I could see the reflection of the empty chair in the TV glass. Her plate had been cleared away, but the space still felt occupied somehow, like absence had mass. He didn't say a word, not then, not later, not even when everyone finally left and the house settled into its evening hush. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, watching the steam rise. Still, nothing from him. It wasn't coldness exactly. It was something murkier, like he was hiding behind silence, hoping it might pass for peace. I gave him until the next morning. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, catching on the specks of dust I hadn't noticed the night before. I made coffee, no appetite for breakfast. He wandered into the kitchen a little after 8, hair mussed, sweatshirt on backward, like he'd dressed in the dark. "I made a pot," I said, sliding the mug toward him. He nodded, sat down across from me. For a minute, we just sat like that, steam rising between us, no words, just the sound of the furnace kicking on. Then, finally, he said, "She's staying in Chicago." My fingers tightened around the handle. I didn't respond. "She left yesterday morning, went to Richard's." His voice was thin, almost apologetic. "Said she needed a break, that it was hard being here." I tilted my head. "She needed a break from Thanksgiving?" "She needed a break from this version of her life," he said. "The one with me. With you." I let that sit. "She's not coming back," I said, not as a question. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "She says she might. I don't know." That was the truth, I think. He really didn't know. But what followed next was different. "She always felt like something was missing," he said slowly, like each word weighed something. "Richard, he's done well, really well." I looked up. "What does that mean?" He shifted in his seat. "He's got a place downtown now, riverfront, and he's comfortable, financially." "How comfortable?" Dad hesitated, then said it like he was quoting someone else. $3 million, give or take." The number didn't shock me the way I thought it might. It just landed, heavy and inevitable. "So," I said, pushing my chair back slightly, "this wasn't about forgiveness or healing old wounds. She didn't want her family back. She wanted an upgrade. He didn't argue. I stood up, poured the rest of my coffee down the drain. She used to tell me money didn't matter, I said, not facing him, that we were rich in love. Remember that? Rich in love. He let out a soft exhale, not quite a sigh. She said that to you when you were 8, he murmured. Well, she said it enough times I believed her until yesterday. Silence stretched across the kitchen like fog. I leaned against the counter, looking at the framed photo above the sink. Us on vacation in Michigan years ago. She was smiling in it. Genuinely, I thought back then. Now I wasn't so sure. I turned back to him. Did you know this was coming? He shook his head. I didn't know, but I think. I saw it forming, little things. And you said nothing? I thought if I ignored it long enough, it might just pass. My throat tightened. You gave her space. She took your silence as permission. He looked tired, older than yesterday. She's had a hard life. Things didn't always go the way she wanted. So she leaves, calls me not real, and you're still handing out justifications like candy. He looked up then, straight at me. I'm not defending what she said. But you're not exactly outraged either. He didn't answer. I grabbed a dish towel, wiped the counter with slow, methodical strokes. You know, I said quietly, I spent years trying to keep this family from falling apart. Canceled plans, made compromises, held back every time she threw one of her fits. I thought love was something you earned by staying. I turned to him. But I guess all I really had to do was bring money. He winced. I didn't wait for a response. I'm not going to argue about her or beg anyone to stay, I said, gathering my mug, rinsing it. But I'll tell you this, Dad, your silence says more than you think it does. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I left him sitting there. That afternoon, I walked around the neighborhood, hands stuffed in my jacket pockets. The wind had a bite to it, dry leaves skipping across driveways. I passed the Hendersons' house, already lit up for Christmas. Plastic reindeer on the roof. Too early, but no one cared anymore. People were always rushing towards something else. When I came back inside, I didn't say much. I made myself a sandwich, checked my email, folded the laundry I'd ignored the day before. But something in me had already shifted. I wasn't waiting for the next apology. I wasn't clinging to the hope she'd change her mind. That night, I replayed every year I had stayed quiet and finally understood what it had cost me. I woke up the next morning feeling like something had shifted under the surface. Not in a dramatic way, just quieter, like how a house settles in the cold. Nothing cracked or fell, but the structure had changed. A week had passed since Thanksgiving. My mother never called, not a text, not even one of her half-hearted, hope you're doing okay messages that usually came days later like an afterthought. My father and I settled into a strange rhythm, civil, minimal, and safe. He took to watching old westerns in the den, volume low, as if noise might jostle what little peace was left between us. I went to work, made dinner, stopped by the grocery store like always. Smiled politely at neighbors, returned library books. Life moved forward, or maybe sideways. Either way, I didn't stop it. But inside, things were no longer still. When I think back, I realize I was trained early to smooth things over. I can't remember exactly when I picked it up. Maybe when I was 10, maybe earlier. But I do remember the feeling, the way the room would tighten when voices rose, and how my instinct was to step in, to offer something, anything, that might bring the volume down. Over time, it became a role. I was the one who apologized first, who adjusted her schedule, who kept her voice even while others yelled. Not because I was timid, not because I didn't have opinions, but because I thought it made me strong, reliable, the one who could hold things together when no one else would. It's strange, isn't it? How doing the right thing over and over turns into something you get punished for. You give people peace, and they come to expect it. They build their comfort on it. And one day, you realize no one ever asked how you were holding up under all that weight. Looking back, every family disagreement followed a pattern. My brother could blow up, slam doors, disappear for weeks. My mother could sob into the sink or hole up in her room and not speak to anyone for days. And me? I was expected to understand. "You know how she is," they'd say. "He's just under a lot of stress." The unspoken rule was that I'd be the one to take the hit, to bend, to make room. At the time, I thought that was what it meant to be mature, to be loving. Now, I see it differently. I started hearing things. Not directly, never directly. Always through someone else, a cousin, a friend of the family, little comments that slipped through like cracks in a wall. "She's just hard to be around sometimes. She always thinks she's right. I mean, she takes everything so seriously. Like, calm down." It was never shouted, never cruel, just enough to make sure I knew where I stood, and none of them ever said it to my face. At first, it stung. Then it confused me. I thought, is that really how they see me? I ran through old conversations, moments I thought had been neutral or even warm, and suddenly they were laced with second guesses. Eventually, the confusion gave way to something heavier: recognition. I saw it clearly one evening while folding laundry. It hit me out of nowhere. My silence didn't make me safe. It made me invisible. The more I stepped back to keep the peace, the easier it was for them to walk right past me. The less I asked for, the more they gave their attention to those who demanded it, even if what was demanded was toxic or selfish or cruel. I thought I was holding the family together, but really, I was making space. Over and over again. Space for their drama, space for their egos, space for their mess. And when things went well, no one noticed. When they didn't, somehow it was still my fault. Why didn't I leave sooner? It's not an easy question. I used to think it was about loyalty. Then I thought it was habit. Later, I wondered if it was fear, that if I stopped playing the role, I wouldn't know who I was anymore. But really, I think I stayed because I kept hoping it would matter. That eventually, someone would look up and say, "You've been holding us together all this time. Thank you." Of course, no one ever did. And that's okay now, because that week, something in me changed. It wasn't loud or dramatic. I didn't throw a fit. I didn't make a speech or write some angry email. I just stopped. Stopped texting first. Stopped offering to fix things. Stopped explaining myself to people who never bothered to understand in the first place. I didn't announce it. Didn't need to. It was quiet, but it was real. Like turning off a faucet that had been running so long, you forgot the sound wasn't part of the house. I didn't know it yet, but stepping back was about to cost me more than silence ever had. I didn't feel brave. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt quiet. After all those years of stepping in, smoothing edges, covering the cracks so no one else had to look at them, it was strange how easy it was to just stop. No announcement, no grand gesture, just stillness. At first, it felt like peace. I didn't call anyone that week. I didn't remind my brother about Dad's blood pressure check or tell my niece happy birthday on the family group chat. I let the silence stretch out like a rubber band, waiting to see if anyone would notice when it snapped. They didn't. Not at first. A few days in, I started getting that uneasy feeling. You know the kind, like when the air pressure drops before a storm. Subtle, but undeniable. I didn't hear from anyone directly, but I got a text from a cousin. "Hope you're okay. Weird not seeing you on the family Zoom." What's Zoom? I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Then I didn't reply at all. Apparently, there had been a family meeting to talk about holiday plans. Just a casual check-in, she said. Everyone touched base, figured out who was bringing what to Christmas, who'd help Dad now that Mom wasn't around. Except me. No one had looped me in. The reason? I found out through another cousin later. I think they figured you needed space, she said gently, as if that was generous, as if it wasn't the exact opposite. It hit me. My role had never been official. I hadn't been invited because they didn't think they needed to. I'd always just shown up, taken notes, sent reminders, kept things running without ever needing credit or asking for it. They didn't exclude me to be cruel. They excluded me because they thought I wasn't essential. Turns out, when I stopped filling the cracks, they started noticing the leaks, but not in the way I expected. The meeting didn't go well. Without me to keep things moving, decisions stalled. My brother wanted Christmas at his house, but didn't want to cook. My aunt offered her place, but didn't want to invite Mom. Someone suggested skipping the whole thing this year. And slowly, the frustration turned into finger-pointing, but not at the people in the room, at me. She's pulling away. I think she's being kind of dramatic. I mean, if she wants to step back, fine, but don't make the rest of us suffer. That one stung the most. I hadn't said a word. I hadn't made anyone suffer. I had simply removed myself from the constant job of holding up everyone else's mess, and that apparently was enough to earn blame. It didn't take long before my father called. His voice was soft, measured, the kind of tone he used when he wanted to sound calm but was already irritated. He started with small talk, asked if I'd gotten snow yet, if I was eating okay. Then he said it. I just don't understand why you're making things harder than they need to be. I let the silence hang for a moment. He continued, "You've always been the one to bring people together. It feels like now you're choosing distance." He didn't yell, he didn't accuse. But I heard it loud and clear. My boundary was being interpreted as rejection, my absence as punishment. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm just taking time for myself." He didn't argue. He just sighed. "Okay," he said, "if that's what you need." And we hung up. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't pace or vent to friends. I sat on my couch with a blanket over my knees, hot tea in hand, and let the quiet wrap around me like a second skin. And I thought, they don't miss me. They miss what I used to provide. They miss the smoothness I brought to rough conversations. The emails I sent. The way I reminded them of birthdays. Of who was allergic to what. Of how to make Dad's turkey the way Mom used to. They miss the scaffolding I built so they could all pretend the house was still standing strong. It wasn't me they missed. It was the stability I gave them. And that was when I realized stepping away wasn't the risk. Staying had been. I didn't expect silence to be so loud. The first few days after I stepped back had felt like a breath, a deep one, like after holding your head underwater too long and finally breaking the surface. But by the third week, that breath had turned stale. The quiet had weight to it now. Not peace, suspicion. At work, I went through the motions. I smiled when needed, sent the emails, showed up on time. But the air around me felt different, like people knew something or thought they did. My phone calls with family became shorter, stiffer. Even my father's voice had an edge I couldn't quite name at first. It wasn't anger, it was something else. Like I'd broken an unspoken rule, and they were all waiting to see if I'd fix it. Then, during my lunch break one afternoon, I got a voicemail from my aunt. It started with the usual, "Hi, sweetheart, just checking in." But halfway through, the tone shifted. "I don't know what's going on with you, but this isn't how family acts. If this is your way of punishing us, I hope it's worth it." Punishing? The word hit harder than it should have, like a slap from someone you didn't even know was angry. I sat there, salad untouched, staring at the phone. I replayed the message again, just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. But it was still there, in her voice, in the way she said us, like I had wronged a whole village. And that's when I realized they had stopped seeing my absence as space. Now it was being twisted into intention, as if my silence wasn't protection, but retaliation. It wasn't the first time they'd used guilt to rope me back in. I recognized the signs. The language had always been subtle but sharp, like paper cuts. Your father hasn't been sleeping well. Everyone's going through something. Don't let this tear the family apart. But this time, those phrases felt heavier. Not concern, leverage. A few nights later, just after I'd gotten home from a long shift, my phone rang again. My brother. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't say he missed me. He went straight into it, his voice all faux casual, like he was trying not to sound rehearsed. "We're worried about you," he said. I kept silent. "I mean, this distance thing. I get it, I do. But if you keep pulling away, it's gonna make things harder. For Dad. For everyone." Then came the line that stayed with me longer than I'd like to admit. "Look, no one's saying you're the problem, but if you don't show up soon, you're gonna become one." He meant it as concern. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe it was never meant to be gentle at all. After we hung up, I just stood in my kitchen for a long time, phone still in hand, heart thudding like I'd run a mile. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was tired, so tired. The worst part was, for a second, I believed him. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I should have kept showing up, kept holding the net under the family like I always had. Maybe this whole stepping back thing had only hurt the people I'd tried to protect. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, playing every conversation back like scenes in a courtroom. I cross-examined myself ruthlessly. What if they were right? What if my silence really was making things worse? The next morning, before leaving for work, I drafted a text to my father. Just a simple one. "Maybe I overreacted. Can we talk?" I didn't send it. Then I opened another message, to my aunt this time. I started typing something about family being messy, about me needing space but not love. I deleted that too. It was like my hands wanted to fix it, even when my gut told me not to. The old version of me, the one trained to patch and soften and make everything okay, was clawing its way back up. But this time I paused, not out of pride, not out of strength, out of sheer exhaustion. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone on my lap, and let the silence stretch. I didn't try to smooth it. I didn't rush to fill it. I just sat with it. Let it be awkward. Let it be uncomfortable. Let it be real. And for the first time, I didn't mistake discomfort for danger. That pause saved me, even though I didn't know it yet. What I learned next was how quickly silence can be replaced by a story someone else tells for you. It started small, too small to confront outright. One afternoon at work, a colleague I'd known for years stopped by my desk. She didn't sit. She didn't joke like usual. She leaned against the partition and asked, gently but not casually, "Hey, everything okay at home?" The question wasn't concern. It was confirmation. Something had already been said. I gave a neutral answer. "We're figuring things out." She nodded a little too fast. Like that fit the version she'd already heard. Over the next few days, it happened again. Different people, same tone. Nobody asked what happened. They asked how I was handling it, as if there were already an assumption that I wasn't. By the end of that week, I understood what they'd done. The story had left the family. I didn't hear it directly at first. It came back to me in fragments, phrases passed along like weather updates. She's been overwhelmed. She's pulling away from everyone. She's just not herself lately. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could point to and argue with. That was the clever part. They hadn't painted me as angry or cruel. They'd painted me as unstable, emotional, unreliable, someone who shouldn't be taken too seriously right now. I sat in my car after work one evening, hands still on the steering wheel, engine off, realizing something that tightened my chest in a way grief never had. This could follow me. My job depended on trust, on being seen as steady, capable. If the quiet version of events kept spreading, silence wasn't protection anymore. It was permission. That was the first real fear. Not losing family approval. Losing ground I'd spent years building. 2 nights later, my phone rang. I knew who it was before I answered. My father didn't waste time. "We need to talk about what's happening," he said. His voice was calm, practiced, like he'd rehearsed this with someone else. I listened. He told me people were concerned, that questions were being asked, that misunderstandings were getting out of hand. And then he laid it out, carefully, politely, almost kindly. "If you don't come back into the fold," he said, "we can't control how this looks, and I don't want things said about you that can't be taken back." It was framed as help, as warning, as love, but it was an ultimatum. Come back, play your role, or watch the story keep moving without you. I thanked him for calling. I told him I'd think about it. We hung up, and I sat there on my couch in the dark, phone on the coffee table, heart steady in a way that surprised me. Something had shifted. The fear didn't vanish, but it stopped driving. For the first time, I could see the shape of what they were doing without rushing to explain myself out of it. This wasn't about fixing a misunderstanding. This was about control, about pressure, about consequences designed to scare me into compliance. I took a breath, a slow one. The next morning, I sent one message, short, clear, no emotion attached. "I'm not stepping back into something that hurts me. I won't discuss this again." No defense, no counter-argument, no appeal, just no. The response came quickly and then stopped. That silence felt different, sharper, like a door closing instead of a pause. I knew this wasn't over. Saying no didn't end the conflict. It escalated it. I could feel the shift in the air, the way you can sense a storm before the first crack of thunder. But I also knew something else. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be disguised as concern anymore. By the 5th week after Thanksgiving, the tone had changed again. This time, it wasn't emotional, it was tactical. I first noticed it on a Tuesday morning. I was standing in line at the bank, needing to transfer funds from a joint savings account, one that had been technically shared between my mother and me for years. It wasn't even active in any meaningful way. It just existed, mostly untouched, for emergencies. Except now, the transaction didn't go through. The teller leaned forward slightly, typing something quickly into her screen, then looked up and said, "I'm sorry, there's a hold on this account." A hold? I asked why. She just gave a rehearsed smile and told me it would be best to call the primary holder of the account. I didn't need to. I already knew. They'd found a new angle. Later that day, I checked a separate auto payment, my portion of a family expense we'd all agreed to split years ago. My deposit had been rejected. The transaction marked authorization removed. Still no call, no explanation. Just a sudden tightening. It wasn't random, it was strategy. This wasn't about finances. It was about message. It was about control. I sat with that for a full evening. At home, alone, scrolling through old emails, reviewing account histories, watching their love turn into accounting entries and legalities. Affection used to come with warm meals, check-in texts, shared holidays. Now it came in the form of halted payments and administrative coldness. They hadn't said a word, but the statement was loud. "If you won't return, we'll make things harder." 2 days later, the phone rang again. A cousin this time, one I hadn't spoken to in months. Her voice was fast, too bright. "Hey, look, I'm only calling because they said there's an issue with your dad. Something's wrong, and they thought maybe you should know." I asked what was wrong. "Oh, they didn't say exactly, just that it's urgent. Medical, maybe. He's not answering his phone, and your mom's been upset." My stomach tensed, and then I remembered how they work. The crisis was vague. The urgency was real, but only in its pressure. There were no actual facts, no symptoms, no diagnosis, just the looming weight of "you'd better show up now." It was meant to trigger me, and for a split second, it almost did. That version of me, the one who would have dropped everything, rushed over, apologized without asking why. She stirred, but she didn't move. Instead, I thanked my cousin and said I'd follow up. Then I did what I hadn't done often enough in the past. I verified. I called his clinic, routine appointment, no emergency. I pulled his insurance portal, nothing logged in the last week. I contacted his neighbor. He'd been out watering the front lawn that morning. It took all of 20 minutes for the narrative to collapse. There was no emergency, just a fabricated fire alarm meant to flush me out. I didn't call them back. That night, I sat at my dining table, a cup of tea slowly cooling beside me. I didn't feel angry. I felt steady. They were escalating, and I wasn't playing. A day passed, then two. No follow-up from them, no apologies, no clarifications, just silence. But it wasn't mine this time. I hadn't gone quiet to avoid. I had chosen silence instead of defending myself against stories I never wrote. They didn't know what to do with that. They were waiting for the version of me who panicked, who bent, who cried and scrambled and pleaded to keep the peace. But she wasn't answering the phone anymore. I didn't explain. I didn't accuse. I just let the weight of my stillness do its own work. And that's when it shifted, subtly but unmistakably. The power they'd gripped so tightly began to slip. Not because I fought them, but because I didn't flinch. That new silence, theirs, was heavier than anything they'd said out loud. And I knew exactly what it meant. They weren't retreating. They were reloading. It started quietly, like most things in this family do. A coworker at the office, someone I'd never spoken to about my personal life, stopped by my desk and asked gently, "Hey, just checking. Everything okay at home?" The way she said home made my skin tighten. Not like she was being nosy, more like she was worried she already knew something I didn't. I asked what she meant. "Oh, nothing," she replied too quickly. "I just heard something. Never mind." She walked off like she'd just bumped into me by accident. But I knew that look. She'd heard a version of me I didn't authorize. That was the shift. The moment I realized the story wasn't staying behind closed doors anymore. By the end of that week, I'd overheard it twice more. Once at my local coffee shop, in a conversation I wasn't meant to catch, and once through a mutual acquaintance who hesitated before repeating it to me. A few people were under the impression I was struggling with mental health, going through something, or, more cryptically, taking time to heal. No one said anything cruel. That was the brilliance of it. They didn't need to defame me, just reframe me. They planted the narrative like a seed, not unstable, but unreliable, not mean, but troubled, not angry, but fragile. And if you say it gently enough, no one questions whether it's manipulation. The next Monday, I got a text from my brother. "Hey, family's getting together at the library meeting room Wednesday night, just to clear the air. It's not a confrontation, you should come." It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons dressed in neutral tone. The location was public, polite. The message was framed as peacekeeping. But everything about it was carefully staged. I didn't answer right away. I let it sit. Then, on Wednesday, I went. I wore gray, Clean lines, simple, nothing dramatic. I didn't carry a folder or prepare a speech. I walked in with nothing to prove. They were already seated, my father, my brother, my aunt. No hugs, no greetings. Just quiet nods and a stack of papers at the center of the table. "Thanks for coming," my brother said, as if we were colleagues, not siblings. They started slowly, questions posed as concern. "Is there something you want to share with us? Do you feel like you've been isolated? We just want to understand." But then came the part they hadn't rehearsed well enough. My father shifted in his seat and said, "You know, there are things that could be affected if this keeps going." I tilted my head. "Things? Well," he cleared his throat. "Financial arrangements, inheritance details, access, not as threats, of course, just realities." He didn't flinch when he said it. He believed it was reasonable. That family loyalty should come with terms and conditions. It wasn't just about the money. It was about their ability to pull levers I was no longer connected to. And they thought that would scare me back into line, but the room had miscalculated. I leaned back, looked at each face, and simply said, "No." No apology, no justification, no counteroffer. Just that. Oh, something shifted. I saw it. The silence that followed wasn't thoughtful. It was stunned. They expected emotion, tears, maybe anger. Instead, they got stillness. And in that stillness, they felt the power flip. They had overplayed their hand. What they'd tried to keep in shadows was now exposed, at least to me, and that's where truth starts to gain traction. They didn't speak again after that. The meeting ended not with resolution, but with avoidance. I gathered my coat, stood up, and walked out without being stopped. No one chased after me, but I didn't need them to. I'd seen it in their faces. They knew they'd gone too far. The second I said no, the game they built started to unravel, and this time they wouldn't be able to pretend it was about love or family or care. This time their silence would cost them. Weeks passed, then months. The cold Midwest snow began to melt, revealing the muddy ground underneath, messy, thawing, honest. And in that in-between season, when nothing feels solid yet, I got the message. A simple voicemail from my brother. "Just checking in. No pressure. But if you're open to a conversation, let me know." No demands, no guilt. Just a quiet uncertainty that hadn't been there before. They weren't calling to win. They were calling because something had cracked. I didn't return it right away. I didn't need to. A few days later, a friend from the community center mentioned something offhandedly. "Did you hear about your aunt and that whole estate issue?" I hadn't, but it didn't take long to piece it together. The money that was supposed to keep everything stitched together, it was either gone or never really there in the way they made it seem. Trusts weren't secure. Plans hadn't been finalized. Promises were made on paper that never got signed. What held the family upright wasn't love or respect. It was assumption, and assumption collapsed quietly, without ceremony. The illusion died before I even knew it was cracking. And now they were circling back, softer, slower, voices stripped of control. But here's what they didn't understand. By the time they came back to me, the decision had already been made. When I finally agreed to meet, we chose a quiet corner of the local botanical gardens, early spring. Still too cold for blooms, but warm enough to walk without gloves. There wasn't much small talk. My father opened with, "I know we didn't handle things well." I waited. My aunt added, "There was a lot going on. More than you knew." I nodded slightly, still waiting. Then my brother, "We just didn't want the family to fall apart." They weren't asking for forgiveness, not really. They were offering explanations wrapped in soft regret, but nothing in their voices suggested real ownership, just fatigue. I listened, and I didn't absorb any of it. There was a time when those words might have pulled me back in, when hearing "we didn't mean to" would have cracked me open, but not now. I wasn't angry, I was just done renting space in my chest to people who only knocked when something broke. Later that night, back home, I opened the storage box at the top of the pantry. Inside was the Thanksgiving plate. White porcelain, faint blue rim, a hairline crack running through the center. It hadn't been used since the last holiday we shared before everything turned. I didn't set it out this time. I didn't smash it either. I wrapped it gently in tissue paper and packed it away. That chapter could rest now. For the first time in my life, I stopped defining family by proximity or tradition. Family, as I understood it now, was presence. It was someone who stayed without needing a role or a title. It was a friend who brought soup when I was sick, the neighbor who shoveled my walkway without being asked, the coworker who noticed I was quieter than usual and didn't pretend not to see. Family was consistency, not blood, and above all, family was choice. That clarity didn't come with fireworks. It came in the form of calm. The next week, I called my brother back. We spoke plainly. I told him, "I'm not angry, but I won't pretend anymore." He asked, "So what does that mean?" "It means," I said, "you'll always have the option to call. But I won't keep a seat waiting. You'll have to ask for it." There was silence, not sharp, not defensive, just real. "Okay," he said. "I understand." That was the end of the call. Life didn't magically transform after that. There were still old echoes, random triggers, the occasional ache when I saw a family together in a park or heard a familiar song on the radio. But I was no longer standing in a doorway, hoping they'd choose me. I'd built a new table with fewer seats, but every one of them was filled by someone who showed up without strings. And the final truth, some people leave your life loudly, others return quietly. And sometimes the bravest thing you do is decide who no longer gets a seat at your table.